All right, Jeff, tell me your favorite story in 90 seconds about Restore Hope.
That's tough for me, but it involves a man named Ed, and a program that we don't do anymore. But at one point, we had the rapid rehousing program for the city, which is taking people who are literally homeless and helping them move into housing. So the day center called us and said, "Hey, we've got a guy who needs help. Could you house him?" And I found out a little bit more of a story because I looked in the homeless management database, and Ed had entries a mile long. Had been in and out of the shelter for 20 years, 3 or 4 times a year. This night was a particularly cold night, and he was out, was drunk, and nearly lost his fingers and toes. The day center nursed him back to health and said, if you promise that you will go into housing at the end of this, we'll keep doing this. We'll keep, or make this worth our while.
Okay. Yeah.
And he said, okay. He wanted to keep his fingers and toes. So he said yes. And so when they needed to help move him into housing, we helped move him into housing. And as part of it, we put that in the record. If you look today at Ed's record in the Homeless Management Information System, 20 years of records, the last entry is the time we moved him into housing. He moved into housing, reconnected or got a job, got sober, started teaching sober living classes at another facility, reconnected with his family he was estranged from them.
Yeah.
Has since moved out into his own apartment that doesn't have a lot of the supports that he had before. But he's still doing great. The last record was that record that we helped him move into housing.
And what year-ish was that?
That was 2012.
2012.
That was 2012. So that's 12 years ago at this point.
Yeah.
And he had been homeless for decades. He's one of the guys who you would say he wants to be homeless, or there are too many problems for him to overcome. I mean, he had nobody else.
Yeah.
All he had was the staff of the day center who nursed him back to health, and he trusted them. But that key thing of moving into housing, that key thing, he didn't move in after a long period of a lot of stuff to work on all the other things. But once he was housed, he had a safe place to then work on all of those other pieces.
Yeah.
Work on getting a job, work on getting sober, work on helping other people, work on reconnecting with his family. That housing was key. And so that's one of my favorite stories because it reinforces the impact of what housing can do for a family.
That's... So that's my friend, Jaynes. Jeff is the executive director at Restore Hope. He loves Tulsa as much as anybody else that I know. And he's going to tell us more about what Restore Hope has done. It's really kind of exceptional what they've done over the past several years with some COVID relief money and the money that they have poured into rental assistance and how that federal money is going away. And what does that mean for the city of Tulsa? Well, he's going to talk about that. He's going to tell a little bit of his own story. Again, I've been friends with Jeff for years, and there's things that I didn't even know. And he's going to help us frame kind of this, what is going on in housing and what are some of the big needs? And he's a data guy. So if you're a data guy, you're going to really enjoy this as well. So I'm just going to turn it over, let you all listen to my conversation with Jeff Jaynes. Here he's going to pick it back up with talking about the ministry of Restore Hope. I know you're a data guy, so let me ask this question. So our housing management system,
Homeless Management Information System, or homeless MIS for short.
So that has been going, that database seems like it's pretty extensive.
It is. Yeah.
Do you know how many people are on that database? How many people have been classified at one point or a time by the agencies in Tulsa?
It would be thousands because right now there are over 2,000 people on what's called the by name list.
Okay.
That's a list of people that have interacted with the homeless system in some way over the past couple of years.
In the city of Tulsa.
Well, Tulsa County.
Tulsa
County. So the Tulsa metropolitan area, who are on a list, and it's listed in vulnerability order, so the most vulnerable to the least, so that they can help people move into housing. Because we want to be strategic about how we help people move into housing. it would be easy to say, okay, this person is here, I'm going to move them into housing. But if that person is taking the spot of somebody who needs it more,
Okay. Yeah.
then we need to have that spot be for the person who needs it more. Now, the hard thing, especially with a more transient population, is keeping track of all of that.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's where that HMIS comes in handy because, and it's really remarkable, but not every homeless shelter gets funding from the federal government.
Yep.
And yet, many of those shelters continue to use the Homeless Management Information System, or HMIS, because it's helpful for our community.
Okay.
In fact, Restore Hope, we don't get any funding for that part of the way that the federal government responds to homelessness. But it's important for us to make sure that we're connected with those other groups, that we're working together.
Yeah. Yeah.
That because homelessness is too big of a problem for any one agency to solve. We have to work together. And so I'm really thankful for our partners at the shelters who every day are doing data entry. Every single person who comes in, every person who our outreach team for the city, the community's outreach team goes out to connect with, they're putting them in the system. And so there is the one night count, the point in time count, or what we call the pit count. And that tells a little bit of a story. But it would be like taking a snapshot of a place and thinking that you could get the whole picture just from that snapshot.
Yeah.
It doesn't show the whole picture. It doesn't show what happened before or after. Whereas HMIS can give us a better picture before and after and everywhere in between.
Yeah. Yeah. So you all at Restore Hope, I mean, again, I'm learning new terms, which is kind of fun for me. HMIS, and I knew about the point in time count, and it does seem like there is as there's there's agency responses, there's city responses, there's county responses, there's state responses, there's federal responses, there's individual responses, right? Like, so, people, depending on whose definition of homeless, right? That, like, if somebody's staying on my couch, in one way they're homeless, in another way they're not, right?
Department of Education says they're homeless because they don't have a home. They're staying on your couch, not their couch.
Yep.
But the Housing and Urban Development, or HUD, does not count that as homeless because they have a safe place to be. Whereas the person who is not on your couch, but on the bench outside, or in their car, or in a ramshackle place that they've created to stay safe, they're literally homeless according to HUD.
So, I mean, that's just one of the things that's interesting to me. But we'll talk more about that in a second. Let's talk about Restore Hope. So you've been the executive director at Restore Hope for
13 years. Yeah, you're almost 13 and a half, I guess. If you're counting half birthdays, it'd be 13.
And if you're 13 and a half, that sounds about right.
Still count it.
They still count it. So tell people, what do y'all do at Restore Hope?
So Restore Hope, we've been around for almost 47 years.
Yes.
And we help respond to poverty. We help people in need. And so for all of that time, we've helped with food assistance. So when we first started, we were trying a whole bunch of different things, but one of the things we started that we continue to do now is help with food. And so we're a transformative size food pantry from what the food bank perspective is. We help people at 2 different campuses every day to serve people in need with food. And so most of the time when people are coming to us for food, something has happened. They had fewer hours at work, their kid got sick and they missed school, or whatever it is. Some crisis has happened. Most people only come to us for food once a year. But they can come up to 12 times a year, once a month. For the last 30 years, in addition to that food program, we've also helped with rent assistance. And what I didn't know when I started at Restore Hope that I know now is Restore Hope is unique in that way, really across the state of Oklahoma. There are some agencies, relatively smaller agencies around the state that help with rent assistance. But usually it's through small federal grants. We also received at times, but you're looking at, a $35,000 grant over a whole year. And that helps a lot of people, but not the same level of people that we're able to help now. Before COVID, our biggest year of homeless prevention at Restore Hope was the year right before COVID, 2018-19, our fiscal year. We served we attributed $305,000 in rent assistance and helped 471 families.
And honestly, and for rental assistance, that's basically they had a crisis, lost a job, went down, medical thing. They didn't have money. They call you and say, "Will you help us pay this?" Is it just rent, or do you all do utilities, or is
It's just rent. So there are other people who help with utilities, and so we've helped with utilities over time.
and you would do like thousands? It could be $2,000 of rent or five. I mean, I can't get an apartment for $500.
You can, believe it or not, you can. Yeah. So it is. It's so over time that number has shifted. Before COVID, that number that I shared would have been about the average about rent that we were paying at that time was closer to $700. Then COVID hit, but that is exactly what rent assistance is.
Okay.
And you nailed the big three. For as long as I've been at Restore Hope, the three reasons that people need our help have been relatively consistent, with the obvious exception of COVID coming in, but that's medical.
Okay.
So, jobs or wages have not kept up with other costs.
Okay.
So either lost your job or your rent went up too high.
Mm-hmm.
So even if you got a 5% raise, which is a pretty good raise, average rents went up 12% in the Tulsa area over the last year. And so say you've got a job, great job, you do well at your job, you get a 5% raise, but your rent went up 12%. So you're still underwater.
Let me so over the past year,
Yeah.
the average parts went up 12%.
Yeah. Yeah. So I was fortunate enough to be invited to a meeting with the governor of the Federal Reserve Bank of Kansas City. So he's on the Fed board, actually is about to have a voting seat to figure out where our interest rates go. And it was me and a room full of bankers, as you can imagine, with the Federal Reserve Bank.
Yeah.
And a lot of the bankers asked questions, and they went through a great presentation. And in that presentation, they said that they went through all the economic indicators because they're trying to figure out, okay, how do we, deal with all these prices and deal with interest rates? So they actually ask a lot of good questions. Their team, the Fed's team in Oklahoma that I've interacted with, have been amazing.
Yeah.
But if you look at it, the single biggest problem from an inflation perspective wasn't actually the food costs that all of us have borne. And Restore Hope had that on our food program too, as all of us have even personally. But housing, out of all of how are you feeling about your economic places? Out of all of the sectors, housing was by far the most negative, almost nothing positive. Most people who answered that survey said it was extremely problematic.
Wow.
And it's because of rent just skyrocketing in the wake of COVID.
Yeah. Yeah.
So there are a lot of reasons for that we could dive into if you want. But all of these questions happened as the Fed, and he thought that he had taken the last question. I kind of nervous.
Yeah.
Said,
Yeah.
It's kind of trouble for the nonprofit guy to ask this question. But if housing is a pain point from an inflation perspective, and we know that the answer to the problem is more housing.
Yep.
So just to play all my cards on the table, the story that I started with, Ed, the answer to his problem was housing.
Yeah.
Now, he had a number of other problems, right?
Yeah.
But housing was the answer. The answer to rents being too high is more affordable housing, right? That's supply and demand.
Yep.
Basic economics.
Yes.
The answer to apartments being not livable and not habitable, more housing. There's more competition. If you have more competition with better landlords, then bad landlords have to raise their game, right? A lot of the answer is more housing. But in order to do a housing development and to build a housing development, you have to have people willing, usually, to go into debt for that housing. And because of interest rates, that's hard. So I got to ask the Fed governor, your problem is that people have a pain point with housing. The answer is housing. But the problem with that is that the interest rates that you've set are too high. What role does the Fed play?
Yeah.
What did he say? He said, well, he didn't take all of the blame for it. Not surprisingly. But he had a really good answer that truly the Fed could be helpful in helping developers stack their portfolio. So it doesn't all come, it wouldn't all necessarily need to come from a debt instrument, from a loan. It'd be grant here, this piece there, that program there. And the Fed could be better about helping people stack their investment to start that.
Okay. Interesting.
So yeah,
Yeah.
the funny thing is, when I started at Restore Hope, I had no idea that I would need to know the effect of the average price of a pound of turkey, with the exception of how it feeds my own family.
Mm-hmm.
But as we had, as we have a Thanksgiving program, a pound of turkey, ultimately when I'm buying 10,000 pounds of turkey, that's a big, 20-cent difference. That's a big importance. So little did I know I'd need to know that. Little did I know I would need to know the in-depths of Fed policy with interest rates and housing development. But it turns out it matters.
And one thing that to me, as I think about these things, there's mercy, right? There's the things we do for people, because somebody who's hungry needs food.
Yep.
They don't need they don't need, they may need 1,000 things, but sometimes if you're hungry, you just need food. If you're, Jesus said something, if I was hungry, you fed me, naked, you clothed me, you invited me in. So, there's that. And then if you're homeless or if you're a person without housing, you need housing, you need a place to stay.
Yep.
And I don't remember, I was a psych undergrad. And so like Maslow's hierarchy of needs, right? Like that's like,
take care of the big stuff.
Take care of the big stuff to be able to do that. So we'll talk about more of that in a second. So as sometimes happens, we narrow, we went down this way. Let me pull back here because what you all have done over the past since COVID, with rent assistance and emergency rent assistance through the federal government, through the relief funds, the emergency relief funds. I don't think most people, somebody read an article in the paper, or maybe they know you, so they know a little bit more about it, but just kind of help on a scale. You all were doing, did you say 300,000? No, 100?
300,000.
300,000, 2018, 2019. COVID hits. What have you all done kind of since then with that emergency rent assistance?
Yeah. So the funny thing is I actually had gone to my board and staff and said, we've got to cut back because that 300,000 was 100,000 more than the grants that we had. So we were already digging ourselves into a deeper place than I was comfortable long-term.
Yeah.
The first year of COVID, when COVID hit, it shut down all the courts. And so first we weren't spending a whole lot. What we were doing was spending our time helping landlords and tenants interpret the rules that were out there.
Yeah.
Who could be evicted, who couldn't, all of those things. Then the first payment that we got for rent assistance in a special way came from the Tulsa Community Foundation, the United Way, for $35,000. It was gone in 2 weeks.
Okay.
Right. So we started to ramp up. That $35,000 became a $75,000 check. And that $75,000 payments just started becoming almost weekly. By the time that year was over, that first year of COVID, we distributed about $800,000 of the TCF United Way funds. Okay. So that's already more than double where we had been the whole year before. At the same time, the Schusterman family came to us and said, in June 1st, the courts were going to reopen. And they didn't want anybody to be evicted in the middle of that COVID emergency. They said, what would it cost to pay everybody on the docket at that time?
Wow.
And we looked at it and it looked like it was about $1.5 million. They said, well, we'll give you $1 million. Our first grant ever from the Schusterman family was for $1 million. So we used that to prevent eviction. At the same time, a month later, the state of Oklahoma came to us and said, the CARES Act, some funds came through the state. The governor would like to do eviction prevention as a part of it. Would we help? A little bit of a different animal because that's federal dollars, which involves a whole bunch of more bureaucracy that you're going through, regulations that you have to follow, all of that stuff, audits. All of that we're good with, but, that's some of it. But one of my board members said, perhaps we're here for such a time as this.
Yeah.
And it's hard for me, quoting the Bible, So we said yes.
Yeah.
So ultimately that first year of COVID, we distributed $4 million.
Okay.
A lot more than the 300,000.
And $4 million. How many families is that?
That was about 1,500 families.
1,500 families.
A number of families.
In Tulsa County?
In Tulsa County.
Okay.
And so it's triple the number of families, but significantly more than triple the dollars.
Yeah.
Because we were allowed to spend more with those state dollars.
Okay.
And so at that point, we were distributing about $3,600, I think was a cap that we had for that. And it felt a little bit like the parable of the talents when the first two guys, the servants who do well and they double their money.
Yeah. Yeah.
And the master says, "You've done well, here's more."
Yeah. Yeah.
I now have a different perspective on that. I used to think, "Oh, how great is it that these guys, they doubled their money, now they have more."
Yeah.
Now I know what it feels like to get the more. I just already did all this work.
Yeah.
I start getting more.
More. Yeah.
More.
So 4 million the second.
4 million the first year of COVID was 4 million. Then the federal government got extra involved, and from 2021, March 15th of 2021, through the end of 2022, we distributed another $54 million. Yeah. Sorry, I get choked up a little bit thinking about it.
How many? And how many families was that?
That was about 15,000 families.
So 15,000 families.
Yeah.
I mean, so I'm just doing some math in my head.
Yeah.
So let's say three people per family. That's 40. That's 2.5 people.
Believe it or not, there's veteran Anderson print out there. Yeah.
40,000 people.
Yep. Yeah.
Who had there not been this eviction prevention.
Yeah.
I mean, 40,000 people is a lot of people in Tulsa County. I don't know how many live in Tulsa County. 300 something.
It's about $1 million in the whole metropolitan statistical area.
That's in the whole thing.
Okay, so the whole thing.
So I mean, so 40,000. I mean, what's that? 4%?
Yeah.
I don't know. So I mean, that's
no, it's less than 4. It's 0.4.
0.4. Okay, it's a lot of people.
Still a lot of people.
A lot of people.
It's still a lot of people.
No, it is.
It might be 4%.
Yeah,
no, I think it is 4%.
I mean, and I just, it's hard to imagine what that flood, right? I mean, let's live in a different world, right? Where these people don't get the help,
right?
And then what are they? And then what happens, right? Like, what does that do to our social services? What does that do to our churches? What does that do to school? I mean, just all these devastating things. So now,
I could actually answer some of those questions.
Okay.
Because for a couple of things. One, our friends in Oklahoma County, so they had a lot of the same federal money. They spent it a little bit faster than we did. So in April of 23, we reopened our rent program. We spent another $11 million in the 15 months after that.
Okay.
So we have only not had a rent assistance program in Tulsa County for a very short period of that time.
Okay.
Oklahoma County, up until very recently, in a much more reduced way than what we have here, has not had a significant rent assistance program.
Okay.
Their numbers are now 27%. Their eviction numbers are 27% higher than their pre-COVID numbers.
Wow.
So all of those people who could otherwise have been helped, prevented eviction with with rent assistance money, like what we have at Restore Hope, all of those people are facing eviction. Here in Tulsa County, we have kept it at pre-COVID levels.
Okay.
So we've kept it relatively flat.
Yeah.
And to your point, it could have gone way up.
Yeah.
And the impact from an education perspective on what it looks like going up. So Impact Tulsa, which is a local organization that works on education policy, did some research using our data, actually, some of our data, on the impact of eviction on Tulsa Public Schools specifically.
Okay.
What they found is that last year, there were 4,000 public school students who faced an eviction.
Okay.
Now, obviously, their name is not always on that eviction docket.
Yeah.
But they live in a household that was facing eviction.
Okay.
4,000 kids
in Tulsa
Public Schools. Of those 4,000 kids, 75% of them were chronically absent during that school year.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
And we know from all of the educational research that if you're chronically absent, you're going to do worse on test scores. Heard it from Dr. Johnson today and talking about that some of the struggles that middle schools are having related to education. And then one of the things that they said was chronic absenteeism is up too. And, at some level, I take that a little personally, not obviously, because Restore Hope is trying to keep those kids in school. And that's what our program does. Now, the problem that we're facing now is all of those big federal dollars.
Yeah.
And ultimately, from March or May of 2020 to September of 2024, we distributed over $62 million in rent assistance
In Tulsa County.
just in Tulsa County. Well, there were at some point there were some outlying counties. We helped in Muskogee and Bartlesville, but most of it was Tulsa County. Certainly most of it, almost all of it, was the Tulsa metropolitan area.
Yeah.
And we spent the last of those federal dollars at the end of September.
And so, okay, so this is what I'm just, based on what we've already said. So you spent $62 million over a period of, what was that? Three and a half years. 3.5 years. And rental prices have gone up 12% over the last year. And you all don't have, that federal money is not coming.
No, there's not the political appetite to do another big response like that.
And homelessness in Tulsa, I mean, to me, like in the mayoral election that we just had, right? Like that was one of the few main issues. So I have like 5 questions in my head. I got to choose one. So here's why do you think homelessness in Tulsa is such a community-wide issue now? Like, why did that become the focus for the election? Why does that matter? Like, how is that impacting people, or why are people noticing it differently, or what's going on that's such a big issue?
Well, it was really an issue from city council races all the way to the presidential race.
Okay.
On almost every case, housing and homelessness was a part of that.
Yeah.
It was part of the debates. It's part of the debates here. When people came knocking on my door asking for my vote, homelessness and housing was part of that conversation.
Good.
And I think part of it is because of the pain point that housing has become, because of the increase in rents. There have been more people who've become homeless.
Yeah.
Our point in time count has gone up, year over year. And it's at one point our point in time count was going up because we were getting better at counting. We were better at finding people.
Yeah.
But now it's going up. Now, the good news about the point in time count is that the most of the increase went up in the shelter count, people who were engaged in shelter.
Okay.
The good news about that is that if they engage in the shelter, they become part of the HMIS, the whole information system, become part of that by name list. And when housing becomes available, they can move into housing. They can be like it, right? They can do that.
And you say when housing becomes available,
right.
And this is another conversation. We are woefully inadequate on housing.
Yeah.
I had a conversation with Tina with Family Promise, and she said, I don't remember, it was over 100 people on her waiting list just to get temporary shelter, and and then they move it, then they help them find more permanent stay. So we are thousands of homes behind.
Yeah. So the Tulsa Housing Strategy, they did a survey of Tulsa and determined that the city of Tulsa, to grow the way we need to grow, needs 13,000 more units of housing.
So a baker's dozen thousand housing behind
13,000. Now that's everything from like affordable housing, studio apartments, like 1-bedroom situations that are affordable, all the way to mansions, right? So like that's every level of housing, 13,000 units. Of those 13,000, about 6,900 units need to be affordable units.
Okay.
To meet that.
And affordable sounds like a word that the government uses. So what is an affordable housing? When you use that word affordable housing, because somebody may be like, well, affordable and back in my day,
Right. Oh yeah. So there's a calculation of what's called cost burden. So the ideal percentage that the federal government thinks you should spend on your housing is less than a third.
Okay.
So you should spend less than a third of your overall income on housing. Okay. And so if you take the area median income, divide that by months and divide that by 3, then that should be where those affordable units are. If you look at the Tulsa numbers, the cost burden, the average cost burden for homeowners in Tulsa or for renters in Tulsa has continued to go up. So at this point, the average, low to moderate income individual is spending almost 50% of their income on housing. So that's not sustainable, right? You just can't, because at some point that pressure happens.
Yeah.
Right. And so the way that I've described it over time is that we have most of the people that we see for our food program, for our rent program, all of the above are people who are kind of on the knife edge of poverty.
Yeah.
One little thing happens and it pushes them over the, right. So you think about I once witnessed a car accident and the person was fine, but their immediate recognition was, I have to have this car to keep my job. And so again, one of the big three for us is transportation. One of the big three reasons people need our help for rent is that they need to fix their car. Now, if I need to put new tires on my car, it's a pain point, but it doesn't risk homelessness.
Yeah.
But if you're on the knife edge of poverty, that one thing could be the reason that you face homelessness. Even before, if you take COVID out of the equation, you just have the flu, right?
Mm-hmm.
When a kid gets the flu, they're supposed to stay home for 5 days. Sick leave isn't mandatory in the United States or in the state of Oklahoma, so a lot of employers don't provide sick leave. So let's say your elementary school kid is home with the flu and your company doesn't provide sick leave.
You're paid by the hour, of course.
You're paid by the hour.
Yep.
What do you do?
Mm-hmm.
You stay home with your kid.
Yeah.
Because that's what you're supposed to do.
Yeah.
And ultimately that potentially means that somebody could become homeless. Most of the people, I think there's an impression of poverty that the people who are facing poverty did something wrong.
Yeah.
That they made a choice in one way or another that got them into a bad situation.
Mm-hmm.
And that certainly happens from time to time. Yeah. But 13 years of my experience, and Restore Hope has asked that question of every single person who's called for rent assistance for 13 years. Why do you need help? What happened that you need help? And those big three have continued. And those big three are not based on individual choices for the most part.
Yeah.
Wages didn't keep up with rent, healthcare costs, or, sickness, and transportation. And so that's the challenge going forward is those factors are not likely to change.
Yeah.
Right? People are going to continue getting sick, whatever that sickness is, whether it's the flu or COVID or something else.
And healthcare costs, are not going to go down.
Right? Not likely to go down.
Yep.
Transportation costs, especially as cars get more advanced, fixing them can, all of those little parts, takes it, you have to fix them. And then jobs, we would love to bring more new jobs into Tulsa. That's what those employers are wanting for their employees when they move to Tulsa.
They got to have housing.
I would say
That's right. We're 13,000 behind.
Ed, we're 13,000 units behind.
Which is, again, an absurd note to me. I was talking with somebody here recently, and they were talking about how Walmart wants their employees to move to the Bentonville area, but housing is not keeping up. And, and so then, there's all these things that are going on. And so again, in some ways it's I just hadn't thought about it, that housing is there. Now, we'll come up with a pin here. I'm going to go back over here. So, because there's other things you all do at Restore. So I know Thanksgiving, and we're doing this right around Thanksgiving.
Yeah.
So Thanksgiving, tell us about that.
Yeah, we just registered for our Thanksgiving baskets, and we're 37% higher than last year.
Yep.
So we registered 37% more families this year than last year. So this year we'll help about 665 families with the Thanksgiving basket. And it's fascinating because on the one hand, it is a box full of food that we're putting together this week with a turkey and kind of all the trimmings.
Yep.
And so you think, that's a food program. And we use food money for it. It's not a food program. It's an abundance program because in the midst of scarcity, when somebody's facing a challenge, they're feeling fear, worry, all of those things that go with scarcity. Hope is not that feeling that goes with scarcity.
Yeah.
We're here to restore their hope.
Yeah.
And so we want to show that abundance. And so we actually try in a whole lot of small ways for this to be an abundance program, not a food program.
Yeah.
So for the clients that they come in, they're thinking I'm getting food.
Yeah.
That's why they're signing up. But on the paperwork that they fill out, there are 3 questions at the bottom. There's a whole bunch of demographic questions at the top. There are 3 questions at the bottom. What are you most looking forward to in that Thanksgiving basket? Now, we won't necessarily always provide those things. It's helpful for us to look at.
Yeah.
But mostly I want them thinking forward
Mm-hmm.
about,
God,
stuffing, pumpkin pie, whatever it is, right?
Yeah.
Feelings evoke abundance.
Yeah.
Second question, what are you thankful for the next year?
Okay. Yeah.
Thankfulness, gratitude, that's abundance.
That's hope. Yep.
And then what are you hopeful for next year? So just even on the application, we're trying to reinforce that. The other thing that we do that's a little bit subversive, at least it feels subversive to the clients when I tell them this. Before I got to Restore Hope, we had a Thanksgiving program before I got there, and the news media came out because of the traffic jam that our program was causing.
Okay.
Not the program, the traffic jam.
Yeah.
And it's because we said, okay, we signed up 600 families in this 3-hour window, and everybody came early. Even when I started, we had that big window, but we noticed that the people who came early for the distribution, even though they had a piece of paper that guaranteed them a basket, they had a voucher in their hands. They came early on the day of distribution. They were the first people who came for registration. We recognized that the people who lined up for the first day of registration were the same as the first people.
Yeah.
When we recognized they're worried that we're going to run out.
Scarcity
mindset.
Yep.
It's because most programs, and this is not to fault any other programs for what they do. Most programs do first come, first serve. And that's a scarcity mindset from the nonprofit's perspective, because if I only have X number of baskets, then once that number is reached, then we're done.
Yeah.
So that means if you're a person 665 in line or 7 in line or whatever, then you're out.
Yeah.
We don't do first come, first serve with any of our programs.
Okay.
But that was the way that we ironed it out. So I started to, so several years ago, we said, okay, the first 200 people that come, we're going to separate into 3 groups. We're going to put them in the last group. The last 200 people that come, we're going to put them in the first group. Now, the first group, they didn't get there all that early because they weren't as worried as the people. It was the last group. When it came for their time, the line wrapped around the building. And they were honestly shocked that there were other people that were there earlier to them getting baskets.
They didn't know the time.
And so I told them, I said, I have to tell you something. We did something.
Mm-hmm.
You were the first 200 people to sign up, and you're the last 200 people to get a basket. Oh, the death stares that I got. But you could just imagine they were staring at me like, they thought that I was the meanest person. And I said, you know what? I follow a book, and in that book, it's the first shall be last.
Yeah.
Ever says the first shall be first. And that story is a story of abundance. People who come in the beginning of the day get the same awesome taste of their kingdom that the people come at the end of the day.
Yeah.
And I actually just even this week I had somebody and she said, well, I came early because I want to make sure that if that I get everything that I need. I said, well, no, you're going to have a voucher. She said, yeah, but I want to make sure I have the same stuff. Like, I don't want you to run out of it. I don't want you to run out of stuff. And I told her, I said, no, actually, the person who comes first, the person who comes last, everybody gets the same awesome basket. And we were 37% ahead. We planned for 50% growth. we plan for enough because our God owns the turkeys on 1,000 hills.
Yeah. Yeah.
Our God has abundance. That the story of our God from the beginning of the book to the end and everywhere after
Yeah.
is a story of abundance. And at a place like Restore Hope, when so many people are feeling that scarcity, when not just housing, but food are some of these big pain points from the Fed's perspective, we want to make sure that they know that our God has enough.
Yeah.
Problem of hunger, the problem of housing, all of those problems are not actually resource problems. Resources are involved.
Yeah.
There are enough resources for us to solve those problems. We are those resources.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so my job basically, I tell people my job is basically to be a kindergarten teacher, to convince people who don't really want to share to share.
Yeah.
The reality is that if we as Christians did what we're supposed to do, there wouldn't be a reason for hunger.
I remember a pastor who said, somebody asked, why, if there's a good God, like, why are people starving in the world?
Yeah.
And he turned it back on him and said, is there enough food in the world to feed everybody?
Yeah.
The person was like, yeah, well, then whose responsibility is it?
Right.
And it is, I mean, I want it to be simple and personal. Like, this sounds, I think this may sound bad, but like, I want it to be somebody's fault that they're hungry.
Yeah, absolutely.
I want it to be somebody's fault that they don't have a house.
Yep.
And I want there to be, but to feel this kind of justice that if you don't do things right, you get the consequences of your actions.
Right.
That's what I mean. We live in this kind of world, but the world is grossly unfair.
And we serve a God who has taken away the consequences of our actions.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Grace. I'm a big believer in grace.
Absolutely. Like, that's the thing. Like, and it is. So there's this mentality that's not true politically. It's not true sociologically. It's not true theologically that individuals can do things on their own.
Yeah.
We've created this myth that we can pull ourselves up by the bootstraps.
That's right.
And we create stories that are not true, even in our own history from a country. Well, look at that guy. They did it on their own. Nobody does it on their own. We weren't supposed to be on our own.
Yeah. It's not good for man to be alone.
Good for man to be alone. And that's certainly true for me, but it's true for everybody. And when Jesus sends people out, doesn't send them alone. We're empowered to do things together, and we're called to do things together. The height of who we are as a country, let alone as a people of God, is the story of kind of the green in the Massachusetts Bay Colony, right? This common field that everybody shared. And if you all know that you're sharing that field, then you don't graze too much because you don't want your neighbor to graze too much.
Yeah.
Right? You know that if I do something to that field and it impacts my neighbor, then it impacts me too.
Yeah.
That we're all in this together. And it's not that we don't have our own individual desires. It's not that we don't have our individual good, bad, and ugly. The reality is that all of those people on the by name list are my neighbor.
Yeah.
That all of those people who are calling Restore Hope are my neighbor. And it is true from a faith perspective that we are called to love our neighbor.
Yeah.
And it's one thing for us to put that halo on and say, I love my neighbor. The reality is that all of that also helps us. And by helping them, it helps me too.
Yeah.
And I think to get back to your
your
original question, why is it so deep from a political perspective? Is because we're seeing that impact of unsheltered homelessness more than we are used to.
Okay.
And it makes us uncomfortable because we kind of know in our gut that we have some responsibility. We're also scared.
Yeah.
Right. And sometimes for a good reason.
I mean, desperate people, for things, right?
Exactly. And I think part of the reason for individualizing is that if we have it be their problem,
Mm-hmm.
and we say they're the solution to their problem. Pull yourselves up by the bootstraps. That absolves me from that.
Yeah.
That they have to do the work to go through a treatment program or whatever else it is.
Yeah.
That it's not my responsibility to help them. The reality is, if we all share that responsibility, and that's what it's going to take to have housing.
Yeah.
It's going to take a public-private partnership. And I'm not saying, honestly, the best thing for that public-private partnership would be incredible private entrepreneurs that are willing to partner with public support. It's hard to do it just on your own.
Yeah.
From a totally market-driven approach, it doesn't work. But that's true about anything.
Yeah.
Most companies have venture capital or angel investors that are part of building that up. In the same way, we as a community need to provide some of that venture or angel capital for some of these investors who are saying, hey, it's a risk for me to put this out on the line, but it's ultimately better for us as a community. So it's going to take some of our corporate responsibility to say, yeah, helping with more housing is hard because it's going to cost a lot of money.
Yeah.
Millions of dollars.
Millions of dollars. Yeah.
Millions of dollars. But if we put that housing up, then all of those eds have a place to be. All of those eds get to live into the dream that God has for them and reconnect with the hope that we all have for them. Like, the thing that I love about Ed and that story is he engaged in the economy the way that we want adults to engage in the economy.
Yeah.
He's working, helping others, he was doing what he's supposed to do.
Yeah.
But he couldn't have done that without him.
Yeah. And I mean, I think that's what I think just for us is it's not my problem. It's an easy way to think because I didn't create a situation. But or maybe our pastor say, it's not my fault, but it is my problem. And I kind of like that. I like to use that in like marriages. That's like when somebody's dating and they're like getting married and they had a bad relationship or it's their second wife. I'm like, hey, it's not your fault that person got burnt, but it is your problem now. She's got to learn to trust again, or he's got to learn to trust again. And you've got to do that. And I think that probably for us, like as a city and as a community, is that it may not be your fault. It may not be my fault. It may not be our fault that this person is doesn't have a house. Yeah. And this person is on the street, or this person is, lost their job, but now they're staying on somebody's couch. But it is a problem, and it's our opportunity to be able to do that. So, one of the things I'm wondering is what is because again, we're filming this in November 24, 2025 years. What is your plan? We know the rental assistance need is going to be high.
Yeah.
You're not getting the federal money. What's your plan?
Yeah. So at some level, it's good to go back to a more normal level of rent assistance because as much as many of the reasons for people to be in the situation they are not their fault, we all do bear some responsibility for helping ourselves move forward. But we often do need help along the way. So Restore Hope is not intended to be the Tulsa Housing Authority. That's not who we are. So we're not there to help, pay for everybody's housing. We're there for emergency rent assistance. And so at some level, we needed to right size back to what we would believe is more for emergency rental assistance. I will tell just a quick sidebar that the folks that we're focusing our rent assistance on now is a result of data. You mentioned that I'm a data guy. I like data. And I believe that if you don't make decisions based on data, then you're not making good decisions. And so we're looking at a data-based system of how we help people. And that data tells me that people who have been previously homeless are more likely to be homeless again. People who have been previously incarcerated, previous impact with the criminal justice system, are more likely to be homeless. People who have been victims of domestic violence more likely to be homeless. We know that because we've done research.
Yep.
We've done so we've used our data and used our connections to do that research. We believe, and we're in a data project now, that families with children are more likely to become homeless. So, but we regardless of whether that is as true as it is for the other groups, we know that those families with children have deeper economic, educational impacts beyond just homelessness, right? Chronic absenteeism is a real issue as well.
Yeah.
And so those are the groups that we're kind of focused on right now with our assistance. Also making sure that somebody's in housing as much as possible. If they're in supportive housing, that we can keep them in that supportive housing, because the wait list for supportive housing is even longer than the wait list that Tina shared with you. So that's our focus, which limits us from being able to help. I mean, during COVID, we were able to help a lot more people with a lot more money. And so now we know that a lot more money is lower.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, the number of people has to be lower too. And so we're changing our rules of who can apply based on needing to shrink that number of people, trying to focus on those groups that are most important, or, kind of that the data suggests that we need to focus on. But the other larger question is, from where do the resources?
Yeah.
And so the great news for right now is that our community, the philanthropic organizations in our community, have stepped up in a major way. And so the Schusterman family, that one grant was our first grant, but it's not the last grant. So we have a significant grant from them: George Kaiser Family Foundation, the Bernstein Family Foundation, the Zarrow Family Foundations. Now, the fascinating thing about all five of those groups, is that I don't share a particular religious background, right? Those are all organizations that were funded by Jewish individuals, helping Restore Hope Ministries, a Christian organization. Now, that said, we will help anybody regardless of faith or no faith, which is part of how we have that connection, a federal connection, certainly. And that's not a limiting factor for us. But they all recognize that neighbor question has been around for a lot longer than just my faith, right? And so that's that Old Testament part for me, but the Hebrew scripture, that makes a difference. And so those foundations have stepped up. Right now we have funds from the Affordable Housing Trust Fund. We know that those are relatively time bound, all of those grants. And so we're in conversation with our community about what's next.
Okay.
And, I'm a pastor.
Yeah.
I was a pastor before I became the executive director of Restore Hope. And one of my favorite biblical stories is the story of Ruth, David's great grandmother. We don't learn that at that time. We learn it later. And it's highlighted in Jesus's genealogy. But she came into a situation it's a great story, but came into a situation where she had a need. And at that time, the farmers had an amazing practice. They would farm most of their fields for themselves, obviously keeping some seed for the future, but then the edges of their field, they kept unharvested so that people in need could glean for those fields.
Mm-hmm.
Ruth went to her future husband's field, Boaz, to glean from that outside edge. So I have a similar thought about the way we need to work with affordable housing going forward. The majority of the funds we should spend as a community going forward need to be for building affordable housing. That 13,000 units isn't going to come cheap. And for the most part, obviously the wealthier units, they don't need necessarily public help. To that there's a market for that.
Mm-hmm.
But for those housing units that are harder to market, the federal government or state government or city government, all of those pieces, need to be part of that solution. So we need to, as a community, invest millions of dollars in responding to that need. All right, so it's going to take a lot of resources, and it's going to take our investment for that affordable housing, the 6,900 units of affordable housing. It's going to take community investment as a part of that. And so we need to spend the majority of those funds on developing those new units. But we should keep the edges of the field. While we're building those big units, we need to provide rent assistance.
Okay.
And so I do think that may be the role of our community and at whatever level, whether that's the city level, makes most sense for me at the city level, because we've done amazing things as a city, like improve our Tulsa, those resources that are out there, that if we can have just those edges be for rent assistance, so we can keep people in their homes while we're building the affordable housing units. I think that'll be key.
Okay.
My hope is that the investment of those large scale resources will ultimately start to see a decrease in the problem. It's that supply and demand.
Yes.
Right. So right now, supply is low and demand is high. And so you can increase your rent by 12%.
Yeah.
You can rent out a place that's not livable. You can evict somebody and have a pretty good expectation that somebody else is going to come in their place. If we build more units, especially if we build more units with great landlords, local landlords preferably, who care about their neighbors and treat people like neighbors and not numbers. If we have those, if we increase the supply of those landlords and those units, then the impacts of demand will go down.
Yeah.
That's the way our economy works, the way it should work. Well, it's just going to take a little bit of help from us to do that. And honestly, like when I think about those big COVID dollars, it was us. That was our tax dollars at work. That had an impact, obviously. But that was us saying, we don't want 40,000 people added to the homeless rolls, because the impact of that is awful for those 40,000. It's awful for us. It's everywhere. It's awful.
Yeah.
And so it's worth our investment to keep those families from being homeless.
I mean, just think about it. I mean, just a holistic approach, right? Like, so if people are in their homes, they're less likely to be outside in the winter months. Yep. They're less likely to get pneumonia, like they don't have health insurance. Somebody's paying for them in the hospital, and that's us. And so would we rather pay $1,500 to keep them in their house? Or would you rather pay $10,000, $20,000, whatever a hospital stay is, and somebody might lose their life and all the devastating things that can go from there. And so, again, it is this combination that we live in of, we all have a responsibility. I mean, the Bible says, like, bear one another's burdens. Yeah. And it also says, bear your own burdens, and those are not very far away.
Oh, well, and there's a beautiful passage, I know in Jeremiah, where the Hebrew people were in exile. They were in enemy territory. And God says, seek the welfare of the city that you live in, for in their welfare, you'll find yours.
Yeah.
And again, I think it's important. I think when I was growing up reading that passage, I was like, you know what? We need to take care of our own. That's true. That's not what that passage is saying.
No.
That's saying we need to take care of them. Whoever the them is.
Whoever the them, yeah.
We need to take care of them, because in their welfare, we'll find ours.
Yeah.
And so I think, and again, we're recording this in November of 2024, in an incredibly divided world. Jesus calls us to be different.
Yeah.
And Jesus calls us to overcome those differences, to seek the welfare of our enemies, to love our enemies, because in their welfare we'll find ours. Yeah. And so even though my life does not look like Ed's, I can't fathom what Ed went through before I met him.
Yeah.
His life now looks a little bit more like mine.
Yeah.
In that, he goes to work every day and those sorts of things. But he's my neighbor.
Yeah.
And I'm so thankful and I haven't seen him in probably 5 years at this point. But I'm so thankful that we had an opportunity to help Ed. Now, back to the economics of it. On average, before COVID at least, it would cost us about $500 to keep somebody from being homeless. That's what, from a prevention standpoint. It's 3 times as much to help somebody who's currently homeless move into housing. Yeah. It's 4 times as much to help somebody who's currently homeless in a shelter. Now, we need to have shelters. We have amazing shelters in our community. And as you heard from Tina, we really need more.
Yeah.
But that's the most expensive option for us. The least expensive option for us as a community is keeping people in the homes they're already in.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so, that's why for us, honestly, I don't know why we're the only ones who do rich assistance at the level we do.
Yeah.
And Tina does. Actually, there's a family who has started to pick that up, and I'm really appreciative of that. But it is going to take a lot more of us coming together to say, okay, how can we keep people in their homes, keep the kids in school, and all of those things?
Yeah. And I think for us, just as a community, I think we're thinking about it, and I hope we think about it holistically. I think we think about it neighborly, I guess, and that we do find a way to just keep seeing each other. We went to Father Greg Boyle. Is that right?
Yeah.
I was he said, we need to learn to be in awe of how those in poverty carry their burdens. What he said, instead of what they have to carry, instead of how they have to carry.
Asking what they have to carry,
Standing on how they. Yeah, and so really, we don't know what it's like. I don't know it. I don't know Ed, and I don't know what it would be like to be in his shoes. I don't know what it's like to to be a veteran and to go through what some of the people who are veterans have went through, or to be somebody who lost a parent through a violent tragedy, or whatever it is. It's easy for me to sit on my high horse and in the middle of Tulsa and think, thank God I'm not like you, instead of thinking, I want to learn from you and I want to do that. Now, I'm going to move our conversation. So how did you? So you grew up Tulsa area,
yeah.
And so. How did you, what was some of the key places along this journey that kind of led into this job at Restore Hope and this passion that you have for working with those in poverty? What were some of those key moments for you?
Yeah. So I just said, my life looked different than Ed's, and it looked very different. Holland Hall was on my mom's way to work.
Okay.
And so I was a lifer at Holland Hall.
Okay.
And went to the big church here in town. And so I lived in a bubble, very much for most of my life.
Mm-hmm.
It was a great bubble.
Yeah.
I'm so thankful for it. But I knew that I was called to something different.
Okay.
When I was 8 years old, I'd had my tonsils out. A lot of kids do at 8 years old.
That's what I did too.
And in the recovery after, a nurse heard something weird in doing my vital signs. And, especially the way healthcare is now, and it wasn't that different then. Probably they don't really have time to process it and move forward. They just got to go to the next patient. But she stopped, and she said something's wrong. And so she ordered a chest X-ray. And in that chest X-ray, she found that I had a tumor, a grapefruit-sized tumor near my lungs. The day first grade ended, I checked into the hospital and had that tumor removed. Later in the biopsy after, they found that it was the ganglioneuroblastoma, which is cancer.
Yep.
Speaking of how I cannot imagine how my parents reacted to that. Now having two kids myself, absolutely. My younger son had a biopsy several years ago, and especially because of my experience, I was terrified. And it was benign. They didn't say the magic word.
Yeah.
After that, for my parents. So I had a tumor, found it was malignant. Thankfully, all of the tests they did after that, no cancer.
Wow.
And I had tests for years and years after. So at some point in my childhood, I knew that I was here for a reason.
Okay.
And then my sophomore year in high school, a young man named Scott Carter passed away. I was friends with his brother, and his brother was a classmate of mine. And I knew that Scott was an amazing kid. And because the story was pretty public, not only because, it was not only big in the school that I was a part of, but he sat on the bench at Oklahoma State games.
Yeah.
His dad later became the athletic director for ORU. was a sports agent at that time. And so I had all these connections. It was a big deal. And so I went to his funeral and I was mad at God. We had basically the same disease. It was different, there was different kinds of cancer, all of that, which makes a big difference. So why did he have cancer and die?
Yep.
And I had cancer and lived. And it wasn't an audible voice or anything like that, but I had the clear piece about it that he said, I had plans for Scott, even though he died. And I had plans for you in your life. And so at some level, I felt called to do something with my life that helped other people.
Yeah.
Trying to figure out what that was. My senior year in high school, actually, Scott's brother led a volunteer trip to the Day Center for the Homeless.
Okay.
And driving onto that campus was leaving my bubble. Because if you've ever driven up to the Day Center, there are people milling around on the outside, and those people were not like me.
Yeah.
But I worked there, sorting clothes, working at the front desk, and found that actually they were people like me.
Yeah.
I saw in that time, I saw their humanity, they were children of God, that they had dreams just like I had dreams, just something had happened.
Yeah. Something happened.
And so that triggered in me a desire to help other people who didn't have the opportunity that I had. Have that opportunity. For a while, I thought that was public service, and so I worked in public service for a time.
Yeah.
And then it was exceptionally clear to me that I was called to ministry.
Okay.
And so pursued ministry. I was a pastor at a local church for 5 years at Southern Hills United Methodist Church, and Southern Hills is right next to the golf course.
Great dichotomy, right?
Yeah, it's across the street from Southern Hills Country Club, but it's a mile away from 1,000 Section 8 apartments. The big fence at the country club kept me out of doing ministry over there. But I started doing ministry in the 61st and Peoria neighborhood, and I loved it.
Yeah.
And so when the job opened at Restore Hope, I knew that it was the perfect job for me.
Yeah.
And it absolutely has been, because it combines my love for what I do as a pastor, which is help understand the Bible and those stories, kind of what we've talked about today. But then engage that in working that out in the community and in helping in some unique ways. And so, I would have never thought, really, at several of those stages along the way, until I got to Southern Hills, I probably couldn't have imagined that I would ever be at a place like Restore Hope. But that central call to love my neighbor, to help my community be better. All of my community. That's been a part of who I have been, at least since high school.
Yeah. Well, and I think he didn't know that about Carter. I mean, the Carter family. I didn't know about that connection. So Jeff and I have been friends for years. So I knew a lot of what you said here at some level.
Yeah. But the fun coda to that is my very first ever sermon at Southern Hills United Methodist Church. Mike and Paula Carter happened to be there.
Wow.
And they have been amazing supporters and friends since.
Yeah.
But I knew that wasn't an accident. It's also the first time before a sermon that I've ever told somebody, by the way, there's something that's going to happen in the sermon. It's like I was telling my testimony.
Yeah,
it's a part of the testimony. It's so
yeah.
They're really amazing people, and I do think that part of Scott's legacy kind of lives on in the work that I do, but it also lives on in the work that they do. The Scott Carter Foundation does incredible work to fight pediatric cancer, and provide research for that. So,
well, at the gathering place.
Yeah.
What was it? 6 months ago? I don't know if it's still. Is it still there?
I don't know.
It's still there, but anyway, if it's a case, and it sounds like we watched and learned about the story, and I think it didn't land on me. I kind of have vague memories of that, but anyways, I didn't know that personal connection. So and I know that obviously, you love Tulsa, and this really is just such a. Again, Tulsa is great for a lot of reasons, but the big littleness of it, right? That, it is not far from, the east side of Southern Hills to the west side of Southern Hills, or from Hall to, West Tulsa where you work. Get there. I mean, there's for these connections that we do have.
Yeah, I also got to coach Scott's cousin.
Okay.
Scott's cousin's kids. So Jack and Layla Ferguson. So their mom, Jacelyn, is Scott's cousin.
Okay.
And so that's the other thing. So so I grew up at Holland Hall. I was a lifer at Holland Hall, at 81st and Sheridan. And now my kids are at Carver and Booker T on the other side of town. And I get asked a lot, like, you're going up there? And that's like, the funny thing to me is, when I first went to the day center, it was leaving my bubble.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm so thankful that my bubble is bigger now. And I think that's another thing that we can do as people is try to be intentional about expanding our bubble.
Yeah.
And you could do it in easy ways too. I have a friend who is, and I do this too, to some extent, but she's being really intentional about trying new ethnic food.
Okay.
And so she's crowdsourcing on Facebook.
That's funny.
Restaurants around town that she can try.
Mm-hmm.
And because that gets beyond her bubble.
Yeah.
And I think we can all figure out ways to do that, so that now when I drive through North Tulsa, when I was growing up driving through North Tulsa, I wouldn't, but it was not something that I had experience doing. That's my community now.
Yeah.
That's where I am. And I'll tell you, when I was pastor at Southern Hills, the parsonage was just around the corner. But again, like those worlds can be miles apart, even though they're actually blocks apart, but miles apart. But I lived around the corner and we had a summer camp program called Project Transformation.
Mm-hmm.
And kids from my neighborhood went to a summer camp at Project Transformation. They had no idea that I lived in the neighborhood.
Okay.
And so they walked by and I was mowing my yard and they're like, Pastor, I didn't know you lived here.
Yeah.
And I think, now I'm right here. The great thing about those kids recognizing that I lived in the neighborhood, I get to watch them grow up. But also, when they would leave pieces of their snack pack on the side, and I knew it was them leaving the snack pack, I could hold them accountable.
Yeah.
That's the thing about being a neighbor, is that we help each other up.
Yep.
In more ways than one.
Yeah.
We encourage people. We help them. We lift them up. And we also say, hey, that trash doesn't belong there.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And it's one thing to say, hey, that trash doesn't belong there. But if you're not recognized as a neighbor, then it's just accusatory.
Mm-hmm.
It's not accountable. It's accusatory. And
so,
but if that person knows that I'm their neighbor and that I live in their common green.
Yes.
That when they hurt my green, they're hurting themselves.
Yeah. And if you left your trash, they could do the same thing.
Same thing.
Yeah.
They can call me out on my stuff too. And I think we've lost a lot of that in this kind of cult of individualism, that we've kind of isolated ourselves. And I think you've talked about it before. We're going to pull into the garage, lower the door, and we don't meet our neighbors. One of the great things about my house is I don't have a garage, which just helps me meet my neighbors.
Yeah.
In a new way. And even at that time, by being out in my yard, mowing the yard, I got to meet more of my neighbors. And so I think moving beyond this idea of individualism, that isolation of that, it helps us to know who we are as a neighbor. It also will help us be less lonely. It also helps us with building our own connections. And as it turns out, I will need help too.
Yeah.
Sorry, go ahead.
No, well, I just think we moved back to Tulsa right a couple months after the Father's Day storm.
Yeah.
And I remember talking to my neighbors, and they're like, well, we didn't really know our neighbors until the Father's Day storm.
Yeah.
And that's not what we want, right? We want to be able to, and I mean, that's part of what I want to do with this podcast is just help us to think through who are our neighbors.
Yeah.
What is going on in our community? And there's a lot of lights in our community.
Oh yeah.
And sometimes we just got to connect things, and we just need to open ourselves up to that.
Yeah.
And it's but it can be scary. I mean, again, and we find our bubble, and I have to say we've got kids basically the same age, and I mean, we both got our kids in public schools, and that's choices that we both made, and people make choices for all their own reasons. So there are people whose kids need to be in a private school, and that's the best environment for them.
Sure.
For us, it was important that like the world you're going to live in,
Yes.
public,
Yeah.
and there's going to be people there who are very, very different than you, and to be able to learn that is important, and to expose them to things that that they can come back to. I was talking to somebody years ago, and there was this missionary who was going to like these like garbage dump, like people who live on landfills. Um, and they said they first lived there, but they realized they couldn't handle that.
Yeah.
That they needed to live just off site.
Right.
So they had that stability.
Yeah. Yeah.
And yet still be connected.
Yeah.
And that's really, I think, is like for us as people, is we're not saying like go be unsafe and go live by the streets.
Right.
Live in your home, be safe.
Yeah.
But be open to
Yeah.
the plight of your neighbors and to see them as neighbors, how we see each other.
Absolutely.
And that goes back to something we heard with Father Boyle, right? Most people are used to being watched, not seen.
Yeah.
And so how do we see people as we drive? All right. I like to end these things with, I'm going to give you some rapid fire questions.
Yes,
Just top of the mind to you. All right. So let's start this way. What is your favorite word?
Exothermic.
Exothermic. And what does that mean?
It's a reaction that energy comes out of. So it's the reason that cars are hot when they're working, right?
Yep.
It's something that is because of what's happening, because of that reaction, energy is coming out of it. And I feel like that's the way we should be as people, that the reaction that's happening within us should reflect out.
Exothermic.
Exothermic.
What is, if I was to go into your house, what would be the most unusual thing I would find in your house?
Oh gosh. I have a newspaper from the day after Abraham Lincoln was shot. I have a copy of a newspaper framed from the day after Abraham Lincoln was shot. So that may not be now. Truly, if you go to my office, if you rephrase that with my office, it's the black velvet Don Quixote that's in my closet.
Okay.
But yeah, that newspaper.
The newspaper, I wouldn't have guessed it, but it doesn't surprise me.
Yeah.
So that's probably what I was thinking about that. Okay.
Black velvet Don Quixote is a little bit surprising.
A little bit surprising. Yeah. What is something that you're currently rethinking?
I think as a nonprofit executive director and as a pastor, I registered as an independent politically for very important reasons.
Yep.
And there are times when, and I'm very grateful for that because it's helped me to see beyond the partisan bubble. But there are times when that causes me to be more silent than I should be.
Okay.
And so I'm rethinking, and I'm not a quiet person.
No.
But sometimes I guard that for important reasons. And so I think sometimes it's important for us to use our voice for others.
Okay.
And I think that's one of the things that I learned in that first visit to the day center, that I needed to hear that voice and I hadn't heard it.
Okay.
So sometimes, so I think I need to figure out a way to speak on behalf of others.
Okay. That makes sense to me. All right, Tulsa, tell me, where's a newer place? It's opened up in the last couple of years that I need to go eat at.
I really, so I'm a big fan of all the Justin Thompson restaurants. Many of those haven't necessarily opened in the last couple of years. Really like Jimmy's Chop House. It's a little bit on the higher end. So on a kind of so Jimmy's is fantastic. Actually one of the chefs is an assistant coach on my baseball team. So it's fun to go in there. But for other restaurants, I think about that. opened up in the last couple of years. I think it's actually older than the last couple of years. But I think it's called Janet's Sunday Dinner.
Yeah.
It's on the north side. The food is incredible.
Okay.
I think they opened during COVID, so that, about a couple years, who knows that time.
Yeah.
But the food is absolutely incredible. It's comfort food.
Mm-hmm.
And it was an incredible connection. So I think I think it's Janet's Sunday Dinner. Look it up on Facebook. That's probably the place.
What is another like underrated like place or group or organization in Tulsa? What do you think people don't know about they should know about?
Well, you've talked to some of them. I love what Family Promise is doing. I think they're a little bit of a hidden gem.
Yeah.
That idea started a long time ago as a way for congregations to come together. And so what they're doing is amazing. There's a group that started that we work with a lot that a lot of people don't know about because they're mostly in the background, called Tulsa Responds.
Okay.
It was an idea of a young Duke student actually at the time, the first thing they did was try to respond to the pandemic. Okay. And connect people in that way. Okay. What they're doing now is they're kind of the workers for a lot of different Tulsa projects. So including Restore Hope and a number of others, but they're responding to people in need with a whole lot of care and intentionality. Tulsa Responds is a great organization. So
okay. Can't believe it took this long to mention Duke. All-time Duke starting five.
All-time Duke starting five. It's hard to not go with Hurley at the one.
Okay.
Because he's the assist leader in NCAA history.
Okay.
JJ Redick at the two.
Okay.
Nobody has shot it better, at least from a Duke perspective. Grant Hill at the three. Zion at the four. Which is tough because that supplants Christian Laettner. But I think even Laettner might put Zion at the four.
Yeah.
And then I'm gonna at the five, I'm gonna go with an Oklahoman, and two of these guys were there while I was there, so it helps. But Sheldon Williams, so Sheldon didn't have the NBA career that guys like Mike Jaminski or other fives from Duke have had. Mark Williams is doing well now, but he's one of the best defenders in Duke history.
Okay.
And I'd have if I could do six. Shane Battier needs to be in that group. So,
okay.
And he could play anywhere.
Okay. I had been asked you that question.
Yeah.
All right. Two more questions. So what is something you wish somebody would have told you 10 years ago?
Well, 10 years ago, now I started becoming a coach for Little League Baseball.
Okay.
And I was hesitant to become a coach. I was trying to not be a coach. I was trying to be an assistant coach. If they would have told me the joy that it has brought, I would have jumped in with both feet.
Okay.
There are probably a whole lot more things that I wish that somebody would have told me 10 years ago, but I think that would be good. It's fresh in mind now. We just coached my last game at Tulsa Little League. So
10 years. It's a long time.
10 years is a long time.
Yeah. So Coach Schiff. My kids knew him as Coach Schiff.
Yeah.
Okay. My final question. I sold this one from my future friend. I don't know if he'll ever be my friend, but I'm his friend through podcasts and all this stuff. A guy by the name of Steve Gus.
Oh yeah.
He does this kind of stuff there in his podcast.
Yeah.
But his ending question is this one: is when was the last time or when have you most recently felt the most loved?
So I mentioned that I've been coaching for 10 years. We had a celebration recently, and Coach Tammy came back, and she told me what an impact my coaching made on her kids.
Okay.
and it's actually her grandkids, and they went through a lot. They have been through a lot in their life. There's a sociological psychology term about adverse childhood experiences and the impact that has on a person's life. And those two's ACE scores are through the roof. The likelihood of their later running into issues, just on a data perspective, is really high. I'm extremely grateful they have their grandmother in their life, who will help that. But the fact that I got to play a role in their life, that's cool, and that she told me that, words of affirmation are my love language. Yeah. And so her sharing those words was pretty special. That's awesome. And just the, especially, as you kind of walk off the field for the last time, the words that people share. Yeah. You mentioned that for a long time your kids called me Coach Jeff, and I hope that there are a lot of kids ultimately, and it gets back to that 10 years question, right? So, I think long term there are things that I have done as a coach that could be far more impactful than the awesome work that I get to do at Restore Hope. In different ways, obviously.
Yeah. Well, again, it's that mercy and justice to me dynamic, right? The being a coach is a very one-on-one, one on, everybody on the team, but you do have that chance to impact one. And I can think of an Andy Stanley quote, makes me sense. I had when I was talking with Tina, same thing is like, do for one what you wish you could do for all.
Yeah,
right?
Absolutely.
Like you wish every kid had good coaches, good extracurricular leaders, teachers, whatever it would be.
Yeah.
And so you can't do it for every kid in Tulsa. But you can do it for one.
Yeah, we do it for guys.
And then, over the course of, because you have two sons who were playing. So you probably were Coach Jeff for 60, 80 kids, I would guess, over the time. Some kids come and leave and then others come.
Yeah.
And so it's a great influence. So,
well, and that's, when again, to get back to that other thing, nobody is successful on their own.
Yeah.
The Olympic athletes that we celebrated this summer didn't get there on their own.
Yeah.
Bill Gates, somebody gave him computer time, right? Mm-hmm. All of these stories of success, they don't just happen because that one individual is amazing. Now, those athletes are incredible. It is incredible, but they had coaches, they had teachers, they had neighbors, they had people along the way who engaged and invested beyond themselves in those other people. And I get to do that as a coach. I get to do that in my job at Restore Hope.
Yeah.
And I think that's what gives me the most hope today.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and that's what, again, and I think about that word hope and Restore Hope, and that's what you do every day, as a job, but also just as a way of being. So thank you for giving us hope about what's going on in Tulsa. And, I'm sure social media, Restore Hope,
at RHM Tulsa on Facebook, Instagram, whatever they're calling Twitter now, and LinkedIn.
Okay. All right. And thank you, Jeff. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Isn't that something? I'm so thankful for Jeff, so thankful for the ministry of Restore Hope. And I really do hope that we're going to be able to continue to help those who are in need of rental assistance. These things that happen to them, often through no fault of their own. Life just happens, and sometimes we can have that stability, but other times we can't. And so as I think about the work that Jeff is doing, I just, and all of his friends there at Restore Hope, I'm just going to be saying a prayer for them. How can we be a part of the solution? That's one of the things I want us to be thinking about is that if it is really a communal response, and this is what I believe, it really is a communal response, then we all have a part to play in it as well. Now, next week, we're going to continue a conversation as it relates to housing in Tulsa. And we're going to be talking with Tina Massey from Family Promise. And so let me just give you a little sneak peek to tell you about the need that there is for families to have housing here in our community.
people know that we're here.
Yeah.
The only problem with that is people know we're here, and the need for our services far outweighs our capacity. And this very moment, we have 139 families on our wait list, which is devastating.
So 139. These are people that are currently without a stable house.
Correct.
They might be staying with a friend. They might be in and out of shelters.
Correct. They may be in and out of shelters. They may be living in their car. And, a lot of people couch surf, and then you're not really welcome. You can only do that for so long. So yes, 139 families currently on our wait list.
And how many families do y'all have in your? Could you all have a kind of a permanent housing? You used to rotate between churches and ask places, and now you're my wife works for Pearl's Hope at Circle Care. So I know where you all are. But so tell us about kind of your current arrangement. What that looks like.
Well, we currently have 6 apartments, and we are the only agency in Tulsa besides the Tulsa Transitional Living Center that keeps families together. So we have 6 apartments. 4 of them are on the women's only campus. So we can't have any men there, but men are very important to us and single fathers. So we have 2 apartments out at 71st and Lewis that for either 2-parent families or single fathers.
Yeah. There's a whole lot more that Tina has to say, and you're going to be really encouraged as you hear the story of Family Promise and what they're doing to make a difference. What are some of the things that she sees about the needs in our community? And then she's got her own story, and it's really fascinating to me to hear the why of her own story. So you're going to want to make sure you hear that. And she has this hobby that I didn't know anything about. That she tells me at the end of the episode. One of my favorite parts is learning a little bit more about people and her hobby. You'll want to make sure that you listen to that next week on the Tulsa Neighbor Podcast. We hope to see you there.